Hi, I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a reenactor. For 36 years, I used to do historical reenactment in my classroom when I was teaching world history. So I would dress for the time period, and I'd bring in all sorts of artifacts and stuff for the kids to handle and to try to make things more real. Well, I'm out of the classroom now, and filling my retirement with going around California and trying to bring history to life and putting these videos together and putting them up on my YouTube channel, which would be really cool if you subscribe to, by the way. So I have a couple of different series going that are about California. One is Chasing Banditos, and the other one is California's Living History. And I try to keep that pretty much in the 19th century, but every once in a while someone's story will finish out in the very early years of the 1900s. But there are times where there's a story that's just too good to pass up. So in my Chasing Banditos series, I'm working on a story about Tom Vernon, who committed one of the last great train robberies, and that was in Saugus in 1929. However, I have an opportunity right now to fly in a commercial airplane that was built somewhere between 1926 and 1933. So the idea of this juxtaposition of a train robber and flying in a commercial aircraft is just too good to pass up. So what I'm doing now is I'm heading down to French Valley Airfield in Murrieta, where I'm going to meet with the Ford Trimotor 4AT, otherwise known as the Tin Goose. I hope you stick with me. Okay, so the basics. The Ford Trimotor, also called the Tin Goose. This is the first real step into commercial airlines. And this was built for transport of people and also of cargo. William Bushnell Stout never graduated with a degree in engineering, but he did take some courses. He bounced around between a couple of undersized auto manufacturers before he landed a job at the Packard Motor Car Company as a sales manager, and somehow became the chief engineer of its aviation division. While at Packard, Stout oversaw the construction of several experimental planes under Navy contract towards the end of World War I. Then in 1919, he started his own engineering company, which built the Stout Batwing limousine. It was an unusual looking airplane with an enormous cantilevered wing, and it was built primarily of wood, and it was powered by a single Packard engine. Well, he worked for Packard, mounted in the nose. He may have been shaky as far as grasp of aerodynamic principles, but Stout had a pretty clear sense of where the industry was going. He saw a largely untapped market for safe and reliable air transportation, both for people and freight. He also realized that the multiple engine approach used by Hugo Junkers and Fokker in Europe reduced the dangers posed by mechanical failure. 3 engines instead of 1, right? And the all-metal construction pioneered by Junkers greatly increased overall reliability, and it made larger planes possible. He tried working with the Navy, but his prototype crashed. The pilot survived. His interest then turned toward general aviation and the emerging market for air transportation. Stout sent a mimeographed form letter to 100 leading manufacturers asking for $1,000 and promising nothing. Henry Ford, along with a group of 19 others, including his son Edsel, invested in the Stout Metal Airplane Company. Within a few months, the Ford Motor Company had bought out Stout's other investors, and Henry Ford was in the airplane business. The single-engined Stout monoplane was turned into a trimotor, the Stout 3AT, with 3 Curtiss-Wright air-cooled radial engines. After a prototype was built and test flown with poor results, the 4AT and the 5AT emerged. So, the Ford Trimotor hit the market in 1926. At that time, it was selling for $42,000, which was considered a bargain compared to what Fokker and Hugo Junkers were charging for their aircraft. And in the 7 years or so that Ford was producing this, between 1926 and 1933, there were 2 models. The 4AT, that was powered by 3 300 horsepower engines, and the 5AT, which came out a little later, powered by 3 420 horsepower engines. Okay, so the idea of a metal aircraft, that's not all that innovative. And the idea of 3 engines, not all that innovative at the time. Fokker was, over in Europe, was using 3 engines, but the Fokker aircraft was constructed largely of wood. And, this is aluminum, all right? The lightest available metal at the time. Also, metal aircraft, again, not all that innovative. Hugo Junkers was doing that over in Europe, and also using the idea of the corrugated aluminum. The reason it's corrugated, that's to give the aircraft extra strength, as far as, you can build larger aircraft that way, but the corrugated metal does kind of cut down on the performance. Okay, so as far as who's going to be in here, you have a pilot and a co-pilot, and you have room for 8 or 9 passengers. By the way, these seats are removable, and that way you can switch from carrying passengers to carrying cargo. Also on the 5AT, there were drop-down cargo compartments that were below the wings. Up to a dozen passengers aboard Ford's Tin Goose had reading lights and curtained windows in a cabin designed by John Cole, an interior decorator at Hudson's department store in downtown Detroit. They were also subjected to the deafening roar of 3 300 horsepower Wright whirlwind radial engines. Sound deadening wasn't going to happen. It would have been a challenge, even if the engineers weren't concerned about the weight it would add. As it was, conversation was pretty much impossible, and passengers were given cotton to stuff in their ears during the flight. Still, the planes were, as Ford had intended, incredibly reliable, and the first airlines in the U.S. had little difficulty selling tickets on the Tin Goose. Customers took confidence from the plane's multiple engines, the all-metal construction, and the safety of a pilot and a co-pilot with redundant controls, not to mention the well-known Ford brand name. Time to board an aircraft that's more than 90 years old and pretend that I'm Indiana Jones. the success of the Trimotor, Ford made a push into personal aircraft. The company's first venture, the single-engine flivver, was a diminutive single-seater that Henry Ford touted as a plane for the everyman. But it came with a price of $28,000, so that probably wasn't an everyman selling point. Less rugged than the Tin Goose, the flivver weighed only 350 pounds when empty. There were a succession of prototypes built, and the final prototype ended up crashing into the Atlantic in February of 1928, and it killed Ford test pilot Henry Brooks, who was also a personal friend of Ford's. And Ford lost interest in aircraft shortly after that. Henry Ford's foray into aviation lasted under a decade, and although the Trimotor didn't do much for the company's bottom line, its low cost, its durability, and safety helped introduce Americans to passenger air travel. Bill Stout would say right up to the end of his life, "My greatest contribution was getting Henry Ford interested in building planes." A flight in a 96-year-old airplane and I'm not dead. Yay! Okay, a flight in an aircraft that was built in 1929, and now I think it's time to talk about a train robbery that happened in 1929, one of the very last. I hope you stick with me on my adventures, and I hope you subscribe to the channel.